Hello, welcome to week 3 of MPAI 600 here at Georgetown University School of Continuing Studies. Excuse me. This announcement's, again, paper 1, the collection strategies due now, yesterday, whenever you're watching this. So I'll have those back to you by next week. And then the congressional walkthrough, we're going to do on November 6th at 8 p.m. Eastern Standard Time. So I know a lot of people said they were interested. Most people said Zoom was their only way that they can pipe in. So 8 p.m. Eastern Standard Time. If it's raining, we won't do it on site. For those of you who want to do it on site, we'll just do it at home. And I'll just walk through on Google Maps going forward. So congressional walkthroughs then. So review last week, again, we went through the requirements and how to associate that with the collection plan, and I look forward to what you do on the collection strategy. And then we covered, again, the analytical traps, the intelligence traps that we all face. Just some key issues that came up, again, confirmation bias. This was evidenced in the case study. This is evidenced in other areas as well, and we'll keep going through that aspect going forward. But again, confirmation bias is we settle on a theory and then we all interpret new information and wrap it around that theory. We all suffer from that bias. Mirror imaging. This is where we feel an adversary or a competitor will come to the same conclusions or has the same incentive structures as we do. That they would be doing this for the same reasons the United States would do, or their business is doing these things to gain the advantage that we think is important. And then we saw a lot of this in the confessions case study. I hope you all watched it. Again, you definitely should have watched it as it was the assignment. But the key point is to apply some of these biases to the confessions case study. And some of the things that came up, again, classic confirmation bias. They had a theory, as you saw in the video, of who did it based on what the neighbor kind of said offhand, that it was these naval personnel. And then they went to ridiculous levels to confirm that. Going to the story, again, trying to believe their confession was correct. And then when that came across, they had an alternative theory, and then they had the theory that the guy whose DNA matched linked up with these 4 Navy personnel. That gets the confirmation basis or bias in a ridiculous manner. Vividness bias. This was very relevant. This occurred particularly when the confessions were played out in the courtroom in front of the jury. We can talk about DNA. We can talk about motive, talk about trace evidence, but that's not going to mean as much as when you hear the confession played. And again, the tone that says, I found the person, I broke into her house, I pinned her to the wall, I took off her clothes, and you saw the rest as well. That's going to have much more of an impact than the DNA evidence or timelines or those types of issues. Negative evidence. This is the process where, again, you focus on the positives. You say, he committed the crime and here's the X, Y, and Z. Here's the confession that proves it. Negative evidence is asking the opposite. If he committed the crime, why are we not seeing DNA, motive, trace evidence, timelines? Those are the important aspects of negative evidence. It's just trying to challenge your assumption with those negatives. Why are we not seeing this? The human mind tends to focus on the positives that we saw. You're guilty. Here's the evidence. We don't ask the question, if you are guilty, why are we not seeing this, and this? And then finally, clientelism. We'll see this over and over again. This is the process of we form information to please a client, whether that's our president, our principal, a business leader, or in this case, it's the people of Norfolk, Virginia. They didn't want a killer running around there uh, and having that impact. So there was pressure to find guilty people or arrest someone so you can satisfy your client. And I think that had an impact on this. We could point to these biases, but overall, the understatement is that there was a need to find a killer, a pressure to find the killer, and it exacerbated some of these biases. And then finally, the Georgetown values. Um, Georgetown's a Jesuit school. It's a Catholic school. I don't know if that had any impact on whether you wanted to come here to begin with. I doubt it. But it is a Jesuit school, and they try and imply certain values, particularly the value of justice going forward. You can look at Detective Ford in this case study and say, well, he was just a rogue cop, and he was just, acting maliciously on it in and of itself. But before you say that, there was an entire system that failed the Norfolk 4, from Detective Ford to prosecutors to juries to judges to appellate judges, all the way up to the governor. And for one reason or another, political expediency, desire to catch a criminal, inability to say I'm wrong, they kept perverting this injustice going forward. And that is, we try and teach people that if you are in a position of power, and these prosecutors and jurors were, you have to have some sort of humanity. Look for the right answer. Don't look to try and convict so you can up your scorecard. And that is something I hope you get this lesson from this case. And then the final thing I'll just take away from this case study is, let me backtrack. Justice was not done until 2019. You saw in the documentary in 2009 they weren't exonerated. Their sentences were vacated, so they were released, but they were still on sex offender lists. They still couldn't find employment. Their convictions weren't exonerated into 2013. The final lawsuits didn't happen to 2019, well beyond the documentary taking place. So there was a grave injustice here that I hope you guys can rectify, or you would rectify if you were in that position. And then the final thing I'll just say, and a student brought this up, and it's weighed on me, and I've given a lot of thought to it, is good people suffer analytical bias. And you'll see that in some of the following case study, whether that's Iraq WMD or 9/11 case studies. Good people, we have our biases and we do it. This wasn't a case of bias. This was a case of an evil person, a guy with evil intent, putting people away for his own evil intent. I've given a lot of thought to that, and I don't necessarily disagree with that sentiment. But before we say this is, again, evil intent, we have to ask the question, okay, were the prosecutors evil? Were the jurors evil? Was the judges evil? Does evil kind of pervade this? Or did they have the same biases that I just mentioned? I don't necessarily have an answer to that question, but that's just an interesting piece to think about. Okay, so week 3 preview, again, 2 case studies, strategic surprise, Pearl Harbor and the Yom Kippur War. As you're thinking through this, think about what just happened in Gaza and how they were surprised as well. And the aspects that we talk about in these case studies, particularly the Yom Kippur War, because that's where the comparison is coming up, apply to what just happened in Gaza. And again, Pearl Harbor, Yom Kippur War. What were the failures? And as you're reading, what were the failures? Were the failures in collection? Were the failures in analysis? Did the failure occur when briefing the policymaker? And did the policymaker have the information and they just failed to act? And what could they have done? And sometimes were there just underlying circumstances? Did just bad luck happen? And again, the readings, the Dahl, the Intelligence and Surprise Attack, excellent book. The Yom Kippur War, the Bruce Riedel, and then the documentary, The Crossing, about the Yom Kippur War. And again, as you're going through, particularly the Yom Kippur War, compare it to the Gaza, because again, there's already analysis on there that's talking about the intelligence failure in Gaza, and it's the first big one since the Yom Kippur War, maybe even worse. So, as I mentioned in the first week of class, what you kind of see in the real world is applicable to the case studies that we talk about here. And that's what I want you to go through in your mind as you're going through this class, or through this section particularly. So if there's questions or issues, let me know. And again, I look forward to finishing up your papers, and I'll have them back to you by the time you watch this next week.